hindi nila pinamimigay ang pera dun sa mga nangangailangan at tinuturuan din natin sila ng leksyon.
Kinailangan pa ba natin na i-zero talaga si PhilHealth to free up 74 billion pesos, Mr. President?
PhilHealth has a savings amount of 600 billion, Mr. President. Supreme Court. And that, we have that guidance already in mind. That's why we did not specifically put a provision exactly like what we had in 2024.
So our chairwoman is informing us that that fourth trigger or fourth mechanism found in the 2024 GAA as about sweeping idle funds is no longer found in our 2025.
Yes, Mr. President.
Bill. But then, Mr. President, yung petition ko po sa Supreme Court is different. Actually, separate yun. I have actually 4 cases before the Supreme Court, Mr. President. One is questioning the level of the unprogrammed appropriations. Number 2 is the PhilHealth, the order to sweep 89.9 billion pesos of PhilHealth funds. The third would be the Maharlika Corporation. And the fourth would be our intra-party dispute with the party of Senator Robin Padilla, Mr. President. So these are the 4 cases pending before the Supreme Court, Mr. President. So anyway, at any rate, okay, Mr. President, does this mean, since we increased the unprogrammed appropriations level by 373 billion pesos, does this mean that we transferred from programmed appropriations under the President's budget 373 billion pesos worth of line items, and we transferred this to the unprogrammed appropriations part? Is that a correct statement?
Well, Mr. President, yes, partly
Yes,
some of them were transferred. But remember, this is also based on a consultation of what the priorities are. Of course, we always have a wish list of projects and also initiatives. But in the end, we also look at the disbursement rate, the utilization rate.
Meaning to say, yung 373 billion pesos na increase sa unprogrammed appropriations, lahat ng idea doon, lahat ng items na yon, yung PAPs ang tawag yan, lahat ng programs, activities, and projects na yon, were originally found in the President's budget but under programmed appropriations. Is that a correct statement?
Mr. President, some of them were not in the original NEP or the President's proposals. Some of them were actually amendments done by institutional amendments done by either houses.
Yes, okay, by Congress. So, does the chairwoman have the anong tawag mo doon? Breakdown. Which, okay, how much of the 373 billion pesos now found in unprogrammed originally came from programmed appropriations under the NEP?
Mr. President, may we be able to submit that to Your Honor with regards to the specific, because it's quite lengthy to go back to all of them.
Just the total, not the total lang, because bakit ko to tinatanong? Because that means that is now the fiscal space made available under programmed appropriations. That's my point, Mr. President. Kaya ang next tanong, of this fiscal space, paano napuno yun? Saan din galing yung mga new PAPs na pinampuno doon sa amount na yun? Doon patungo yung pagtatanong ko po, Mr. President.
As an example, Mr. President, the foreign assisted projects in the NEP of 2025 is 215,649. Now, what the BICAM approved is 66,279. So basically, 149,370 is now in the unprogrammed.
Yes, binaba. Okay, so let's say 149. But definitely more than that amount siguro, no? You're just using that as an example.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
There are also others
Yes.
na, yeah.
But the level for programmed appropriations did not change. Tama po ba yun? From the NEP level, programmed appropriations is still now, the BICAM report level for programmed appropriations is the same as the NEP level. Tama?
Yes, Mr.
Correct.
President.
Meaning to say, kung nagbaba tayo ng 149 billion, inalis natin sa President's programmed appropriations, binaba natin, pero the level is now the same. Therefore, in the budgeting process by Congress came up with at least 149 billion new items which they funded under programmed appropriations. Tama po yun?
Yes, Mr.
Correct,
President.
correct. That's why we need to know the level, Mr. President. But anyway, the chairwoman has promised to give us in writing na lang, no? The level. So that is what happened. And then, Mr. President, if I can ask about the miscellaneous personnel benefits fund, sa NEP, sa President's budget, 163 billion pesos ang level niyan. Sa BICAM report natin, 109 billion pesos. Meaning to say, nag-free up din tayo ng 54 billion pesos. Kasi hindi rin nagbago yung bottom line. Bottom line, the same. So, is it correct to say that the 54 billion pesos na inalis natin sa MPBF ay nalagyan din ng new items by Congress? Tama po ba yun?
Yes, Mr. President. Also for the miscellaneous and personal benefits, there are a lot of reasons. There are reasons also for that. For example, although there are items in the proposed NEP, the reality is also certain job positions are not filled. That's why we also looked at the utilization rate, disbursement rate as in the past.
Yes, and we were able to free up, let us say, MPBF line lang ito,
54 billion.
Kaya
Yes,
nga, and
Mr.
then,
President.
since hindi nagbago si bottom line, ibig sabihin nun, nalagay sa ibang mga budget items yon, PAPs, na hindi na nanggaling sa Presidente, nanggaling na po sa Kongreso. Tama po?
Yes,
Tama
Mr.
po,
President.
okay. And then, pagdating sa pension and gratuity fund, sa President's budget, 232 billion ang level nito. Ang ending sa ating BICAM report, 144 billion. So, ano to, mga 88 billion pesos din po yung na-free up natin. Tama po? So, ang gusto sabihin, ang dami na natin na-free up. So,
Mr. President, it's true that compared to the NEP, there may have been a decrease, but bearing in mind also that compared to 2024, there's been an increase. And we know that for a fact that the increase can cover the current needs for personal benefits and pensions.
yes, Mr. President. Pero yun lang, I'm just looking up, I'm just pointing out the fiscal space that Congress has freed up under programmed appropriations. Yun po, that's what I'm pointing out. And bago malimutan, we also freed up 74 billion pesos, 74.4 billion pesos sa PhilHealth subsidy. Tama po yun? Which is under programmed appropriations. Tama po?
Yes, Mr. President.
Why did we have to do that, Mr. President? Sa dami na ng... hindi pa tayo makakame up ng total amount of the fiscal space which we have freed up sa programmed appropriations because hindi natin alam yung how much of the 373 billion of new items under unprogrammed appropriations came from program. Hindi pa natin alam eh. But we will add to that the MPBF, we add to that the PGF na mga freed amounts plus the 74 of the PhilHealth. Kinailangan pa ba natin na i-zero talaga si PhilHealth to free up 74 billion pesos, Mr. President?
I know, Mr. President, that's also the question of many. And I've thought about this long and hard. And there's no denying that PhilHealth has a savings amount of 600 billion, Mr. President. And that's also the reason why initially the administration thought of it as a way also to augment certain short fundings that we had, for example, for health workers, etc. Hindi natin maintindihan ba't hindi nila ginagamit yung pera na nandun na meron sila na nakaimbak sa isang, ewan ko kung anong klaseng account yan, savings account, na ang kinikita ay mas mababa pa kesa sa inflation. Mr. President, hindi pwedeng sisihin na nagkulang tayo sa pagbibigay sa kanila. Kasi nga ang daming ang pera na nandyan. Hindi nila pinamimigay ang pera dun sa mga nangangailangan at tinuturuan din natin sila ng leksyon. Kung bigay ka ng bigay, nandun lang yung pera, hindi naman nagagamit. Paano naman yung mga ibang programa rin ng gobyerno na nangangailangan din ng funding? Yun nga yung sinasabi ko, pag meron kang siyempre, di ba, sinasabi natin, 5 yung anak mo, lahat yan kailangan pantay-pantay na mabigyan mo. Totoo yun. Pero sa lahat sa kanila, tinitignan mo rin kung sino may pangangailangan at sino naman ang may kakayanan na itayo rin ang kanyang sarili. Yun din ang sinasabi natin, it's a leadership problem also in PhilHealth and it's a disbursement problem. Gaya nga ng sinabi ni Senator Cynthia, ang problema din sa PhilHealth, hindi rin natin alam kung ano ba talaga yung mga benepisyo natin. Wala tayong card na nagsasabi hanggang dito o ganyan ang maibibigay sa'yo, ang tagal-tagal ng approval minsan, hindi alam ng ating mga kababayan kung paano sila makapag-comply dun sa mga requirements. So ito yung mga nagiging issue. Hindi sila kulang sa pera. At alam ko yung iba talagang pinagdidiinan ito. Pero 600 billion ang meron sila. Samantalang, ang dami natin din pangangailangan pagdating sa edukasyon, pagdating sa infrastruktura. Alam mo, maganda talagang magbigay ng social protection, wealth transfer. Importante yan. Pero kailangan din natin ng wealth generating initiatives kasi hindi natin mapopondohan ang mga ibang bagay na magbibigay ng suporta sa ating mga kababayan kung ang gobyerno ay walang programa na magpapalago ng ating ekonomiya.
I'm reminded of the saying that health is wealth. But I don't think, Mr. President, that we can use funds meant for health so that we will justify this, that we will generate wealth for the nation.
Mr. President, the budget of the DOH has increased from last year.
DOH.
So it may not have been an item, for example, in particular for PhilHealth. Pero, meron naman pong increase na nangyari dito sa DOH from 241 billion 602 in 2024, yung BICAM natin nasa 247,923. So we are, of course, health is wealth. That's very important. But also, health, the financial situation of our country, the economy, and wealth-generating initiatives are important so that we can support social protection initiatives such as the health sector.
Sige, mag-digress po tayo muna sa health sector. Pero napansin ko po na ang ating final amount sa Department of Health is 247.9 billion pesos sa BICAM report, mas mababa by 25.7 billion pesos from the GAB. 273.7 billion pesos. So, binawasan pa rin natin ang DOH. And then, ang ating pampalubag-loob lang ay yung level, nung binawasan na, yung ending amount is still higher than the 2024 GAA amount?
Yes, Mr. President.
But why did we reduce it, Mr. President, by 25.7 billion pesos, which is a very significant amount also, Mr. President?
Well, Mr. President, there are certain agencies that we also supported. Like, for example, the Department of Agrarian Reform. We had given them an increase for their budget. We also had given the state universities and colleges an increase in their budget. The DICT, we've also given them an increase. The Department of National Defense also has an increase. So, Mr. President, if possible, we would like to increase all, but then also because of the substantial budget allocation of other departments, we also made sure that departments that are also crucial have a respectable amount that they can operate with.
So, pwede ba nating masabi na itong 74.4 billion pesos ng PhilHealth na ziniro natin ay binigay sa ibang mga ahensya ng gobyerno na sa tingin natin ng ating committee na mas nangangailangan o mas deserving ng amount, at masasabi ba natin na hindi directly health-related yung napuntahan ng 74.4 billion pesos na yon, Mr. President?
Mr. President, hindi sa masasabi nating more deserving, more in need, perhaps.
Yes.
And then also, yes, I think I know where your next question will lead to. But yes, I think transparently you can look that if you look at the increase in some appropriations, they're not health-related.
Yes, they're not health-related. Ngayon, Mr. President, ang problema kasi yung timing din ng pagbaba natin eh. We want to teach them a lesson, pero 74.4 billion pesos tatanggalin natin, isi-zero natin. Pero hindi ba natin alam na pinasa natin dito sa chamber natin yung panukala na pababain ng premium rates. Nababa natin eh. At the same time, inutusan natin sila to increase their compensation packages, which ginawa nila. Tapos hindi lang dagdagan pa, may konsulta, etc. So, ang nangyayari po, Mr. President, we are being conservative with PhilHealth by reducing the subsidy by 74.4 billion pesos at a time when when PhilHealth has now committed to be more proactive, aggressive, and then we are returning some benefits to the direct contributors by lowering the contribution rate, Mr. President. Ganyan ang nangyari. So, parang hindi makatwiran yung 74.4 billion pesos reduction, wrong timing pa. Now that kung ano yung itinuturo natin sa PhilHealth, pinipressure natin sila, gagawin na nila. Tapos ngayon, parang pipilayan natin sila para magawa nila yung sinasabi natin gawin nila, Mr. President.
Mr. President, unang-una, hindi ako naniniwala na mapipilayan sila. Kasi nga may pagkukunan pa rin silang 600 bilyon. So sabihin na natin, 70 billion ang hindi na nalaan sa kanila ngayon sa budget. Meron naman silang pagkukunan na 600 bilyon. Ngayon, sa susunod na taon, kung talagang tinupad nila ang kanilang pangako na number one, mas iigihan nila ang pagbigay ng suporta sa mga may sakit na nangangailangan. Pangalawa, na-implement na yung batas. Ewan ko kung napasa na ba yung batas na yon na bababaan yung premium at hindi na dapat kasama sa batas yung pag-increase ng premium na yon. At saka natin masasabi na O sige, sa susunod na taon, 2026 budget, pwede na nating punuan muli sapagkat nagagamit na nila yung kanilang reserba.
Nakalimutan ko nga i-mention na pinush ko nga sila na magkaroon ng dental services at ngayon nababasa natin that they are also offering dental services, Mr. President.
Exactly, Mr.
to be
President.
covered.
I think this can be evaluated. For example, you have a child who has committed something, you're teaching your child a lesson, hindi naman porket na nag-reform na kaagad, ay ibibigay mo na muli. Kailangan mo nang patunayan rin na masusustain ito. Magagawa niya talaga ng tuloy-tuloy. Kaya nga, dito, uulitin ko at alam ko marami rin ng magtataka dito. No? Pero 600 billion, may pera kang ganon. May mga ibang programa ng gobyerno na pwede ring pondohan. At hindi naman maghihirap ang PhilHealth dahil meron silang pagkukunan para bayaran. Ang problema nga nila noon, hindi nila ginagawa yon. Kaya ngayon, salamat sa inisyatibo nga, sinabi nga natin, yung ating minority leader, sinabi, dapat meron kayong dental benefits o gagawin daw nila o ginagawa na nila. O ngayon, may batas pero hindi ko alam, parang hindi pa yata napapasa na hindi muna itataas ang premium, 'di ba? Hindi pa yan batas. 'Di ba? Iamyenda pa lang natin 'yan. Hindi pa yan nangyayari. So sa ngayon, ang daming nagrereklamo na ang taas ng premium ng PhilHealth tumataas, pero ang benepisyo nila hindi pa rin ganyan. Kaya meron pa rin silang nakokolektang premium na mas mataas.
Ang ating problema sa PhilHealth subsidy kasi, Mr. President, is yung formula is provided by law. Yan po, that is the long and short of it. Ngayon, by giving zero subsidy, are we in effect saying that we are suspending that the provisions in the Universal Healthcare Act and the syntax law, so thank you for correcting me, in the syntax law, which provides for that formula, which we discussed during the, we discussed, I think, during the budget deliberations. We mentioned the formula. So, is that what we're doing? Number one, kasi when you give a government agency zero budget, talagang number one, ang message dun punishment mo yan. Okay. And then, but number two, merong rito na there is a formula. And the formula yields I think around 74.4 billion pesos ang paggamitin yung formula. Hindi pala 73, I will correct myself. 53.13 billion pesos ang may-yield ng formula, Mr. President, around that amount. So, is it also our message that we are suspending the formula found under the syntax law?
Mr. President, we are not suspending the implementation of a law. What we are saying is that at the moment, it is an unfunded program or law of the government. You know, we have more than 1 trillion pesos of unfunded laws in the country. Maraming mga batas pero nagkukulang ang pondo para dito. Ngayon, the GAA in itself is also a law. I understand the Senate minority leaders mentioned, but this is earmarked. Earmarked ito, so dapat doon talaga napupunta. Pero yung BIR, for example, has also that earmark na they are able to harness or benefit from 1% of their total collections. But because they haven't really reached a certain utilization, the government has not given them that 1% supposedly that would go to them. So, Mr. President, this is not, sadly, the reality is this is not uncommon. And the GAA itself is a law. We have a discretion also to look at the macro picture of a particular time in our society and economy and to see what fiscal space we have.
Thank you for that, Mr. President. But unfortunately, I think when we apply the formula, what is to be remitted to PhilHealth under the UHCA, this is based on actual revenues or collections. So, wala pong reason na masabi natin it will be an unfunded mandate kasi if the collection is zero, percentage of zero is zero, pero may collection eh. So we have to, if the sponsor will allow me to read the provisions. No? Ano ba dapat ang binibigay sa PhilHealth? Utos ng Universal Healthcare Act. Revenues from excise tax on sugar-sweetened beverages. 50% of total revenue shall be allocated, may word pa na exclusively, to PhilHealth. 80% nito. 80% of the 50%. Tama? To PhilHealth. Okay. Revenues from excise tax on alcohol products. 50% of total revenue shall be allocated exclusively to PhilHealth. To the tune of 80% of that 50%. Revenues from excise tax on tobacco products. 50% of total excise tax collection from tobacco products shall be exclusively allocated to PhilHealth to the tune of 80% of that 50%. And then revenues from excise tax on heated tobacco products and vapor products, from the total revenues, PhilHealth must be given 80% for the implementation of the Universal Healthcare Act. And then, sa pagkakaintindi ko, ito na yon. That is why umabot tayo sa 74.43 billion sa NEP because health insurance coverage under sin tax law amounting to 53.13 billion pesos to be used for health insurance premiums of indirect contributors. Plus, inad doon yung 21.17 billion pesos benefit package improvement under the Universal Healthcare Law, plus a smaller amount of 127.5 million pesos special purpose insurance, million lang po yun, 127.5 million pesos special purpose insurance coverage for the health insurance premiums of the beneficiaries under Pamana program. Pag isuma total lahat yun yung 74.43 billion pesos na nasa NEP as subsidy to PhilHealth. Pero meron pa nagdi-dispute na hindi yan tama, di ba? Although I must hasten to add na meron pa nga nagdi-dispute dyan that if you properly apply the formula, it should even be a bigger amount than the 74.43 billion pesos. That's the point, Mr. President. And then na-zero na natin. And then, admittedly, ang destinasyon nung na-free up na 74.4 billion pesos, aminado tayong hindi sa directly health purposes, Mr. President. So that's what happened to PhilHealth, Mr. President. So, it's a different... this is my opinion, Mr. President. The subsidy for PhilHealth is in the nature of is like an automatic appropriation because the law provides for the formula. Parang ministerial act na lang sa DBM to determine the amount under the formula and then give it as a subsidy. Minimum amount of subsidy kasi itong mga benefit packages, dagdag na po yan. Pero minimum amount of subsidy is determined by law. So when we are discussing general principles ng budget, when they mention automatic appropriations, ang instruction nila sa Congress, you cannot touch automatic appropriations because the appropriation is provided by law. So that's the point of this representation, Mr. President.
Mr. President, if I may, there are also other laws that specify that the government will automatically appropriate. But then, the reality is, even if the government wanted to, it hasn't been able to appropriate, as I mentioned, more than 1 trillion pesos worth of funds that belong to, that should have funded certain laws that have been passed. So, Mr. President, I think we can argue about this all day. I understand the point of the minority leader. What I'm just saying is that with discretion also of the legislative body, we believe that the 600 billion of PhilHealth is for them to be able to utilize. They are not definitely destitutes. They have the funding for it. And if they also show their capability to utilize those funds, next year, definitely it will be a different scenario once we evaluate the progress that they have made. Because we can go back and forth to this, and as the minority leader has said, that doesn't stop him from questioning this from another independent body, the judiciary, to clarify the matter.
Yes.
But we stand by the fact that the GA is also a law, looking at the snapshot of hopefully the next year and how we will be able to fund all our priority projects.
So, Mr. President, yun lang, I'm just pointing this out na we may be inviting another case before the Supreme Court because under the theory that the GAA, if we pass this, is amending indirectly the syntax law, Mr. President, the formula. Well, and then, Mr. President, para na rin po hindi humaba, can I just make of note my observations and then request in writing some further information about them, Mr. President? So, for example, we increased the Office of the President budget by 5.4 billion pesos. Ang tanong na lang siguro why, in writing na lang po. Kasi pwede naman nung sa plenary, pwede naman talagang nailabas na lang yun kung if they really need additional 5.
Mr. President, if may I clarify it, because I think it's for good reason. This was actually a request because all of a sudden, we have been chosen or we have been assigned to host the ASEAN summits. Dapat yan kasi Myanmar. For some reason, some delegates said na they're not comfortable because maybe of some political situation in Myanmar, and the next is the Philippines. So that's exactly the amount that is needed for the ASEAN. That is the only addition because when they did the NEP, wala pa yung designation sa atin.
Meaning to say that this 5.4 billion was reflected in the Senate committee report.
Yes, Mr.
Correct.
President.
Okay. So, congratulations for that and thank you for pointing that out, Mr. President. Nasunod yung ating version.
Finally, no?
Yes, thank you. Then, Mr. President, ito kung pwede na lang din in writing unless, of course, our chairwoman feels the need to explain it right now. The Office of the Secretary of the Department of Agriculture suffered a decrease of 22.3 billion pesos. O bakit po? Malaki po yun. Department of Education, the Office of Secretary Angara also suffered a decrease of 12 billion pesos. Bakit na lang po? 12 billion, yes. And even the UP system, we reduced it by 641 million pesos. Bakit po? And then, dinilimit ko na lang po yung sa mga malalaking halaga. Like the Office of the Secretary ng Department of Health, 25.7 billion pesos. Bakit po? Binawasan natin siya. Halos 10% po ng budget din niya yun. DILG Secretary, Office of the Secretary by 819.9 million pesos. Sa Department of Labor, the Office of the Secretary, malaki-laki rin po yung dinicrease natin dito, 16.8 billion pesos. Tapos, napakalaki naman nung dinagdag natin sa Office of the Secretary ng DPWH, 288.6 billion pesos. Siguro po dito, pagdating sa DPWH, kung pwede may special request ako, if ma-identify how much of these are flood control projects? Because yan po yung parang sensitive issue of the day, Mr. President. DSWD, Office of the Secretary, we are reducing it by 94.3 billion pesos. Ano pong apektado rito? Is it what particular program? Can we, this one, ma'am, can we, Madam Chair, can we provide details right now? Is it 4-piece? Is it AX? What's affected, Madam Chairwoman?
Pero yung AX, tumaan.
Ito ba? Basahin mo pa.
So ano nga yung mga nababa?
Suma total nito mga to. Diba? Suma total ba niya yung baba?
Yung AX ba tumaas? Ano yung mga tumaas? Kasi mas mataas pa rin siya sa last year.
Minus siya.
Ay, ito na kasama sa 74 nito. Tama ba?
Kasi tinaas na nila. Okay, kita mo nga sa akin.
Ito lang
So
tanong
yung
ko, special purpose funds.
from NEP, ano yung 4-piece? Ano yung 4-piece na?
Sino nga kasama? Si 74? Sino pa? Bakit tama?
114.
25.
Eh ngayon, anong binigay natin?
Alam.
Okay.
89, tsaka ito. Ito plus ito. So 7. Ito. Ayun.
Ito mang dati sa 35 daw po, tinaasan ng House sa 26, pinawi na ng konti. Pero effectively, sumaas ka pa rin. Mga
Ano dapat? Okay, Mr. President,
Yes, ma'am.
initially, there's been a decrease in the 4-piece program from the proposed NEP. And then, but then there's also from the NEP actually, there's been an increase in the IX program.
yes ma'am, sa AX po.
So in the IX. So, as you know, with the 4-piece program, there's also a status of like the certain families graduating from the 4-piece program.
But for the DSWD Office of the Secretary to be decreased by 94.3 billion, malaki po yun. That could not have come from the 4-piece program's decrease, Mr. President.
Sa DSWD po, meron po increase from NEP to Gabang House na 83. Nung papunta na tayo ng Baikon, parang withdraw, parang tinawasan nila yan.
So there's an increase from NEP,
Yes ma'am,
Cut.
ng mga
83 billion. Ito yung kabuuan ng DSWD.
Yes, yes.
Ano
Yes
na?
ma'am. Yes ma'am.
OSEC. So,
Nag-increase sila ng 83 billions from NEP to Gabang. Ngayon, nung papunta natin sa Baikon, tinanggal nila yung mga increases nila ma'am.
pero
Tinawasan nila.
binawasan nila pero mas mataas pa rin.
Suspension. Suspend tayo 1 minute.